Thank you, Michael. That was fun, unexpected for a pre-talk song, but hey, it does work. So thank you everyone for choosing to be part of this spiritual community today. We know in this time of social or physical isolation, you had a choice. There are lots of places you could stream. And we're delighted you chose to spend part of your Sunday morning with us. So we continue to work our way through David Rico's book, Triggers. The subtitle is How We Can Stop Reacting and Start Healing. Today's topic is Disarming Our Triggers. Is there anybody in this room that has not been triggered at least once this week? If so, please raise your hand. It's hard not hearing the giggles, but I can easily imagine a wave of them. So how about today? Anybody not been triggered yet today? I don't know anyone who isn't triggered, at least sometimes, at least for a little while. Even when we're sleeping, sound asleep, minding our own sweet business, we can have troubling dreams, either recreations or remembrances of unpleasant experiences, and be jolted back to awakeness with the physical and mental feeling of that difficult experience, even if we made it up completely. And sometimes those triggering dreams stay with us a long time. I remember hearing early during this coronavirus period how many people were having disturbing dreams. And I've had a number of nights of them myself and still do every now and then. Well, I have 3 short stories to start today's talk with. The first one, my alarm goes off at 5 o'clock on Sunday mornings because I call my dad in Florida and we talk before he goes off to church. So at 4:45, before my alarm goes off, it's still quite dark. I hear noises outside my side patio. It's the roofer. I left him a phone call last night to say, please, can you not work when we're having meditation and service today? Because I really need it not to be noisy in my house between like 9:45 and noon. So is there anything that you can do to not be here then? The answer is yes, but it meant they showed up at 4:45 this morning. So I got up and got dressed and I went out and talked to them and realized in that moment when I was walking out my front gate around to the side of my house, I could either be pleased that they were here and they were going to fix the roof of the carport, or I could be irritated that it was 5 o'clock in the morning. And they're finished, by the way, they're done and they cleaned up and it's beautiful and they did it right. So I'm excited. So that's story 1. Story 2, I posted on Facebook this morning a little meme by Flying Edna. And as I was posting it, I remembered the story about the creator of that particular piece of artwork. And he and his ex-wife split. And because he was an artist and his business was a family business, the judge decided to give his name and all of the artwork that he had created before some year to his ex-wife. So his ex-wife had authority to publish his name and his art. He fought it for 18 months. He also changed his name. So he had a choice. I mean, here's this huge trigger, this artist who doesn't have ownership of his own work, his own creation. And I watched him really struggle with whether to be offended and bitter and stuck and irritated and aggravated and annoyed at the bad person judge who decided to give his intellectual property to his ex-wife. And he stayed stuck for a little while. And then he realized that there was no value in that. So he chose to move from being offended, bitter, and stuck into moving on. And his new work, while different, I think is very much improved over the stuff that he used to make when he was, the author previously known as Brian Andreas. So we are always in this space of being able to choose how we wish to be, how we wish to present, how we wish to engage in the world. And we have lots of opportunities to look at ourselves and look at how we envision our experience and how we choose to present. The third story is actually a story I've told before. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Niagara Falls and taken the ride on the Maid of the Mist. It's like a tugboat. And it's crazy, right? You get dressed in rain slickers that aren't going to actually be of any use at all, but you do it anyway. And you stand on the front deck of this very powerful workboat, which then pushes nose into the base of the Niagara Falls. And it sounds like the biggest noise you can imagine, just the falls in front of you. And behind you, you hear the engines of the boat full throttle forward. And they can't, and they're just stopped. The power of the water and the power of the big diesel engines, they're at an impasse. And whether the experience is exhilarating or terrifying is entirely up to our point of view. We can see it as a trigger, or we can see it as a stressor. And so today's talk, Disarming the Triggers, is to help us remember and to give us some ideas of some possible tools that we can use to help us disarm or disengage from those triggers and stay in a more balanced and even point of view. Because really our quality of life is our viewpoint. Regardless of what it feels like in that moment, it's almost never what happens to us. And it's almost always how we process the experiences and choose to remember, engage with, recreate, or reenact them. Most events are actually neutral. Not all of them feel like it, but it's always our way of dealing with them. And most often, that has to do with the difference between what we expect to experience, what we think how it ought to be, and what we actually do experience. So the psychologists talk about there being 4 main categories of emotions in human experience: sad, mad, glad, or scared. They couldn't figure out a way to make it all rhyme. But 3 of these tend to be primary sources of triggers that David Richo writes about in his book. And there are 3 times in our lives when we think we experience one of these emotions, which would be sad, mad, or scared. We think they happen in our present, in our past, or in our future. Actually, only one of them is probably accurate. Because if we're having an experience of our past, we're having it now. If we're having a worry about our future, we're having it now. And when we're doing that, we're not actually present here and now. So late yesterday afternoon, I noticed I was feeling triggered because of some stupid thing. Because it felt like the people I had been communicating with, I'll put that in quotes, were being especially dense. And I felt irritated by that. Fortunately, I was still working on this talk, so I could see that all of that was happening in my head. And I could stop it before it got too much out of hand. Pretty rapidly, I could see that it had virtually nothing to do with anybody else or with any actual exchanges I was having with other people. Our own triggers inside us thrive when we don't feel safe, not because we're not actually safe, but because of some old story of when we weren't safe. David Rico's quote that I used last week, "We are bullied by our own unfinished business." He also notes that we might be especially vulnerable to being triggered when we're already in distress, when we're cranky, overtired, physically uncomfortable, irritable, frustrated, or upset from a recent disturbing experience elsewhere. Any of this familiar to anybody? Our excess reaction leads us to make hasty and undiscerning decisions. We lose our discriminating power because we get pulled out of our thinking mind into that reptile brain I talked about last week. And then we may do or say something we'll later regret, and then, so on and so on. And he says, insufficient sleep or low quality sleep when we are not feeling rested is the worst possible combination. One of the things that's going on for so many people while we're in this virus pandemic thing is people aren't sleeping well. And so everyone is already tilted towards being triggered, even if it's something that they would be unaffected by under normal circumstances. So we've all got these triggers, and we're all sort of leaning towards that, oh, push my button, please, so I can fuss. And when we do that, if we're paying attention, we recognize that we're reacting to them blindly, and this is not our best choice. So what can we do about that? In chapter 3 of David's book, he lists 20 possible tools or inner resources we can develop, install, upgrade, or become more proficient at in learning to handle our triggers. David again. Without tools, we're at the mercy of many triggers. With tools ready at hand, we deal with what happens with grace and effectiveness. We can trust we have all the tools and inner resources that we need. When used, they let us deal with life effectively and appropriately. We can even read the paper or watch the news and not have it ruin our day or our week. So I'm not going to list all 20 of David's tools. You can get the Kindle or the book and read them for yourself. But I will point out 5 of them. I'll start with the one that I used yesterday afternoon. One of the rules is look for something humorous in our reaction to a trigger. In my case, I was standing in my kitchen, grumping at myself, fussing about these people who were just being dense. And I thought, oh, look, aren't you cute? I'm feeling agitated because blah, 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 this stupid thing happened right in the middle of working on a talk about how to disarm and diffuse triggers. Isn't that funny? And just that simple awareness was enough to pull me out of my trigger and back into my centered self, and to take the sting out of something that had pulled me completely off base and allowed me to get back where I know is useful for me to be. Another one of the triggers or tools that he talks about is stop taking it personally. More than one person has said to me that practicing Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements is a lifetime commitment. When we're able to feel the trigger coming on or rising up, what would it take for us to realize it's not about us and just react with an ouch or that hurt, or even just see it without responding at all? then we can witness our circumstance or our conditions and not be trapped, not be caught at the effect of them. There's way more to it than that, but at least that's a place to start. Another one of the tools that he offers is really a reminder, and that is when we start taking it personally, we think it's just us and nobody else has ever had this experience. But when we realize we're not alone in feeling that way, the trigger loses a lot of its sting. Because once again, it's not personal. It doesn't mean we don't act when we need to. And we get to really make sure we need to act before we send in the cavalry. So what if the trigger is internal? What if the trigger is our inner critic who's bad-mouthing us because of something we did once upon a time or something somebody else said to us when we were young? What would happen if when that inner critic started yakking, instead of arguing with it, creating a battle scene in our own head, or agreeing with it and falling over and saying, oh my God, you're right, I'm so terrible. What if we used it instead as an alarm that it was time to wake up and do a little spiritual practice? Or a clue to pull out those supportive affirmations, or maybe do a little self-loving kindness meditation practice with ourselves. We get to decide what to do when those triggers rise up. No matter how badly we feel triggered, we always have the option to choose a different route. And sometimes when we feel triggered and engaged in a conflict that may or may not be a real conflict, sometimes we can step away, take a time out, sleep on it, respond to that email, phone call, text, or tweet later, and give ourselves time first to regroup, reground, recenter. Take a breath and take a more reasoned look at the situation and then decide how we want to engage rather than just do the knee-jerk thing that feels good for a moment but creates a bigger mess we have to clean up later. So what if, as David suggests, that we learn to recognize our triggers and acknowledge them and use them as tools to learn about ourselves? From David Richo again, the psyche, always on the lookout for an opportunity to heal and integrate, catches onto a trigger so that our original incomplete experience can be finished at last. We're triggered because there's something in us that wants to be healed, that wants to be made whole, that wants to live in the now, not in the then. And we're getting rid of the baggage, getting rid of the old stories, the untruths, the bad data, the bad instruction that we received in our past. So how do we heal our triggers? This is the big question. Don't you wish there was a silver bullet, something you could do that was simple? Sorry, it's not that. It's a process and a continuous practice. And as we practice, if we practice intentionally, we get better at it. We add more tools to our toolbox of inner resources. We find ourselves feeling more comfortable, more capable, more adept in our world, and more open to new experiences. We begin to trust ourselves more, and we recognize that we will know the most beneficial thing to do, and we will have or do have the skills and capacity we need to do that because we have built those internal muscles and the stamina needed to do that. So I want to bring up one piece of the legacy of Representative John Lewis, who passed away just a few days ago. I want to remind you of the 54-mile march that he started from the Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama. They were headed to the Capitol in March 1965 to protest unequal treatment of blacks with respect to voter registration. In Selma, half the population was black, but only 2% were on the voter rolls, and this wasn't okay with him. This is important. He wasn't upset or angry. He wasn't triggered or pulled off course. He was totally clear and totally committed to helping to create nonviolent change in the way politics were done. He didn't make it to Montgomery on that march. He ended up in the hospital, along with 77 others from that group of 600 marchers, after being beaten and tear-gassed on the Pettus Bridge. The march, however, was completed several days later, accompanied to Montgomery by a National Guard escort. And less than 5 months later, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. Change happens when we're willing and able to not get pulled off our centers and stand in what we believe is right. It doesn't matter whether you agree with John Lewis's political stance or not. It is worth noting and remembering that throughout his life, John Lewis knew what was important to him and did not let anything or anyone or any story get in the way of that. In the public, at least, he was pretty close to unflappable, untriggerable, unbotherable, which meant he had already worked through his triggers by the time he got into that public eye. So what does this have to do with the science of mind, you might ask? Thank you for asking. Ernest Holmes, in The Science of Mind, on page 53, some of you will recognize this quote. We should learn to control our thought processes and bring them in line with reality. Thought should tend more and more towards an affirmative attitude of mind that is positive, stable, and above all else, toward a real unity with spirit that is already complete and perfect. We should be able to look a discordant fact in the face and deny its reality, since we know its seeming reality is borrowed from illusion. We should be able to look at a wrong condition with the knowledge that we can change it. The realization that we have this ability must be gained by the application of our knowledge. It's not just a game we play in our head. It's practice and application of our knowledge. And I'll repeat today's spiritual thought from Dr. Ernest Holmes from Think Your Troubles Away, because I think it's really good. We believe that when the human mind, individually and collectively, needs a new truth, out of the necessity of the desire comes the truth it needs. Everything we know in philosophy and science proves it. Out of the desire for a greater good comes ways and means for creating that greater good. And if every person made a demand on intelligence for the solution to the present world problems, there would come an adequate and happy solution. That is in line with the way we know, what we know about the way life works. The tools are in our hands. We have to use them. And it means we have to be responsible for our triggers and our reactions. The 11 people in the Power of Your Word class are beginning to get a taste of what this means. every single week, their challenge is to take something happening in the world that triggers them and discover and name the truth about it. See that event through God eyes. And it's making some of them pretty crazy, because this is not a simple thing, and yet it is in our remit. It's in our, you could say, marching orders if you wish, to be able to take what doesn't work and isn't capital T truth and turn it until it becomes that. So I want to close with a piece of the Friday reading from the Daily Morning Practice from Ernest Holmes' 365 Science of Mind, page 212. Today I see with the eyes of the divine. I look at things in a perfect and direct way. I see through confusion to peace, through doubt to certainty, through fear to faith. Quietly then, I review myself, those around me, and everything that occupies my attention, bringing to them all a broader vision, a deeper insight, a more complete perspective of the infinite harmony, which I know is in back of, in and through everything God has made. I keep my eye on this one thing. What God has done is good. And then I want to read a quote from Representative John Lewis from his book, Across That Bridge, A Vision for Change and the Future of America. You are light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish your light. Study the path of others to make your own way easier and more abundant. Lean toward the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division, and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only love, only peace in your heart, knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. Choose confrontation wisely, but when it's your time, don't be afraid to stand up, and speak out against injustice. And if you follow your truth down the road to peace and the affirmation of love, if you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, a world community, and a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself. It's quite a charge, quite a challenge, and a promise. The only way we can be that light is if we purposefully move from an internalized place of reactivity to a place of intention, attention, awareness, and responsiveness. Anytime we allow someone else to play us like a puppet, or we let some unfinished business of our own history push us into action that does not serve our intention for our individual and collective future, we reduce our ability to be present to life and to participate willingly and wholeheartedly in the creation of it. So as best you can in every moment, pay attention, notice, choose, do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to do the prayer. So shut your eyes with me and feel your way into that whole and holy place that lives in, as, and through you, and in, as, and through all of us. Infinite, radiant love, that whole and holiness that resides at the core of my being and at the core of all beings. I remember my peace in that, and I remember my interconnectedness with all beings, my interconnectedness with all of life, all of awareness, all of creation. And I remember at every single moment I get to choose how I show up in the world. I get to choose why I show up in the world. And I get to choose what I focus on. I know the same truth for and about every single being in this Zoom room today, and anyone who might hear this message in the future. We live as light and love and peace and joy as best as we can remember. So I stand up to the challenge. I stand up to the task at hand. And I remember that expression of holiness and wholeness and life that chooses to live as me. And I know that same option, that same expression is available to all, and within the capacity of anyone who has studied and thought and realized what's actually important. So I bless this awareness. I bless this way of being in the world that gives us a world that works for everyone. And I bless this opportunity that each of the beloveds on this call has a chance to express and know good and more good. I feel so grateful to be able to be participating in this experience. I know that life lives as me and lives as all. So I breathe into that and I relax into it and I allow its full expression and I let it be. And so it is.